never think it'll be her, your best friend, the one who's seen you through every heartbreak, every gray hair, every long night when life felt too heavy to carry alone. For 40 years, Denise and I were inseparable. We'd shared recipes, secrets, and dreams. I even introduced her to my husband, Martin. Back then, I thought it was a blessing to have the two people I trusted most get along so well. But trust, I've learned, doesn't always break with noise. Sometimes it fades in quiet dinners, soft glances, and unanswered calls. By the time I realized what had happened, my marriage was gone, and Denise's smile was still hanging in my doorway. But betrayal has a strange way of reshaping a woman. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just waited. And when the right moment came, I found my way into her house. You know, when I think back on it all, it still amazes me how something that felt so steady for decades could quietly fall apart. Denise and I were more like sisters than friends. We met when we were both in our 20s, two tired young mothers just trying to keep our heads above water. Back then, life was all noise and motion, diapers, night shifts, and bills that always seemed a little too high. We met at the public library of all places. I worked there part-time to help pay the rent after my first husband left, and Denise came in every week with her little boy, always looking for children's books. She had this laugh, big and easy, the kind that filled a room, and even though she was running herself ragged, she always managed to look put together. I guess that's what drew me to her at first. She had this energy that made you believe life could still be beautiful even when it was messy. Our friendship started over coffee in those cheap paper cups from the library vending machine. I remember her saying, "If it weren't for caffeine and faith, I'd be in a ditch somewhere." I laughed, so hard I nearly spilled mine. From that day on, we just clicked. We became each other's person, the one you call when you need to cry, when you need to celebrate, or when you just need someone to listen without judging. Through the years, we raised our kids side by side. We shared school runs, Sunday dinners, and long nights on the porch with sweet tea and too many cigarettes. We didn't have much, but we had each other. When her car broke down, I drove her to work for 3 months straight. When I lost my job at the library for a while, she slipped a little cash into an envelope and said it was from the Good Fairy. We were family in every way that mattered. Then came the year everything changed. The year I lost my husband, George. He'd been sick for a while, cancer that crept up on us before we even knew what to name it. Denise was there through it all. She drove me to the hospital, stayed overnight when I couldn't bear to be alone, even cooked for the boys when I couldn't get out of bed. When George passed, she was the one who held me up at the funeral when my knees gave out. I'll never forget that feeling, the strength of her arm around me, the sound of her voice whispering, "You'll get through this, Evie, I promise." After that, I didn't think I'd ever open my heart again. But life has a strange way of giving you new chapters when you least expect them. I met Martin at a church book drive, of all places. He was calm, kind, a bit quiet, the kind of man who listens more than he speaks. Denise liked him right away. "He's got good eyes," she said. "That's how you know he's solid." And for a long time he was. When Martin and I married, Denise stood right there beside me, tears in her eyes like it was her own sister getting married. She even helped me pick out my dress, a soft blue one that made me feel younger than I had in years. After the wedding, she started coming over more often. She'd bring casseroles, fuss over the curtains, tease Martin about his cooking. It felt normal, easy, comfortable, like she was just part of the family. Our lives settled into a rhythm that lasted decades. The kids grew up and moved away. We retired, and our circle of friends got smaller, as it tends to when you get older. But Denise was always there. We spent our birthdays together, took little weekend trips, and called each other every other day, just to gossip or talk about aches and recipes. She was at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, sitting at the same spot at the table with that familiar half-smile, always helping me carve the turkey or set the table. Sometimes when I think about it, I realize how much trust I gave her, the kind that only comes from years of showing up for each other. I never once doubted her loyalty. Even when she made decisions I didn't understand, like dating men half her age or moving houses every few years, I still saw her as the same woman who'd once stood by my hospital bed. I'd tell people, "Denise is my rock. She's like my sister," and I meant it. Looking back, I can see the small shifts now, the ones that didn't seem like much at the time. The first time she started dressing up a little more when she came over, or when she'd bring a bottle of wine, for the three of us, even though she knew Martin preferred bourbon and I didn't drink much. I remember her laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, and me laughing along because, well, that's what friends do, right? I brushed it off, told myself it was nothing. That's what happens when people get comfortable. They blend, their lives overlap. And truth be told, I liked seeing them get along. It made me feel safe, like I'd managed to create this perfect little triangle of friendship and love. I didn't see the imbalance forming, or maybe I just didn't want to. We had a tradition, 3 of us, Friday dinners. Sometimes I'd cook, sometimes Denise would bring something over, and we all sit around the table, talking about old movies or politics, or how the town had changed since we were young. Martin would tell his old stories about growing up on a farm, and Denise would roll her eyes and say, "You've told that one 100 times. He'd grin at her like it was the first time anyone had ever said that, and I'd smile because it all seemed harmless. After George died, I'd prayed for peace, for something steady and familiar, and for a while that's what I thought I had. 2 people I could depend on, a quiet home, a life without surprises. I didn't notice that peace turning into something else. I didn't notice how much Denise had started to fill the spaces in my marriage, little by little. Sometimes I wonder if she planned it that way, or if it just happened. Maybe she got too comfortable in our world. Maybe she thought she'd earned a place in it that was more than friendship. I'll never know for sure. All I know is that when you trust someone for 40 years, your heart goes blind to things your eyes should have seen. One afternoon, she brought over an old photo album. We sat in the living room, flipping through pages, pictures of our kids, our old road trips, birthdays where we looked so much younger, so much lighter. There was one picture of her holding my baby boy, smiling like she belonged there. She sighed and said, "We've lived a lot of life together, haven't we?" I nodded, smiling. "More than most sisters ever get," I told her. And I meant it, because that's what I believed we were, sisters in everything but blood. If I'd known what was coming, I think I still would have smiled that day, still would have made her tea, still would have laughed at her stories, because back then, my trust in her was like air, invisible, constant, something I didn't even think about needing to breathe. But trust, well, it has a way of disappearing quietly, doesn't it? Not in one big storm, but in soft, nearly invisible changes. The tone of a laugh, the way someone's eyes linger too long. The small silences that start to stretch a little wider each week. I didn't know it then, but those small changes were the beginning of something I never imagined I'd live through. A slow unraveling of 2 of the closest bonds I'd ever had. My husband's and my best friend's. And yet, even now I can still picture that time, before it all fell apart. When everything felt simple and safe. When Denise was just Denise, and Martin was just my husband, and I was still the woman who believed that loyalty lasted forever. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with comfort. And for a long, long time, I was far too comfortable to see what was right in front of me. But that was before the cracks began to show, the small, quiet ones that would change everything. It started small, the kind of things you wouldn't even notice unless your heart was looking for trouble. Denise had always been around. She was part of the fabric of my days. But one morning I realized her visits had started to change. She wasn't dropping by to see me anymore. She was dropping by to see us, or rather him. It began innocently enough. She'd stop by with pie or with some new recipe she'd just tried and had to share. And Martin, well, he's always been the polite type. He'd pour her coffee, pull out her chair, laugh at her jokes. It was harmless, I told myself. Harmless because this was Denise, my oldest friend, the woman who'd stood beside me at my wedding, the woman who held my hand through widowhood. Surely there was no reason to question her. But still, there were moments. Little ripples in the calm. Like the time she brought over a casserole, still warm in the dish, and said, "You're lucky to have him, Evie. Not many men help in the kitchen like this." She smiled as she said it, but there was something in her voice, a softness that wasn't meant for me. It was faint, like the echo of a thought. She hadn't meant to speak out loud. That night, when I washed the dishes, I could smell her perfume on the handle of the coffee pot. Sweet, expensive, the kind of scent that lingered long after the person was gone. I rinsed it off, telling myself I was being silly. After all, perfume sticks to everything. But over time I started noticing other things. The way she'd call just as I was heading out to run errands. "Oh, is Martin home? I wanted to ask him about that handyman he uses." or how she'd show up in new blouses, hair done just so, and a little more lipstick than usual. I told myself it was fine. She was single, retired, just enjoying herself. And I was overthinking, because that's what women my age when the house gets too quiet. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was late, past 8, and I'd been upstairs folding laundry. The sound of laughter floated up from the kitchen. Martin's laugh, low and warm, the kind that used to be mine alone. I froze halfway down the stairs. There was something different about it, something I hadn't heard in years. I heard her too, Denise. Her voice had that teasing lilt, the one she used when she wanted attention. I stood there on the step, holding a towel in my hands, listening like a stranger in my own home. And then, as if the air itself shifted, it went quiet. No movement, no laughter, just silence. When I walked into the kitchen, they both looked up at me, too quickly, too still. Denise's cheeks flushed slightly, and she fumbled for her purse. "I was just leaving," she said, her tone too bright, too rehearsed. Martin busied himself with wiping down the counter. Though there wasn't a crumb in sight, something inside me sank, slow and heavy. I didn't say a word. I just nodded and went back upstairs. My mind was too tired to chase thoughts that I wasn't ready to name. After that night, the air in the house changed. Martin became distant, distracted. He'd startle when I walked into a room, close his phone when I passed by. He started mentioning Denise casually, too casually. She told me about that new restaurant, or Denise said her roof's leaking again. Her name started showing up in our days the way dust settles in a room, slowly, quietly, until it's everywhere. I tried to talk myself out of suspicion. I blamed it on age, hormones, the loneliness that creeps up when your children move away, and the evenings stretch longer than they used to. Maybe I was jealous of their friendship. Maybe I'd turned into one of those women who sees ghosts where there aren't any. That's what I told myself, until the day the ghost became real. It was a Thursday, sunny, ordinary, and cruel in its simplicity. I was out shopping with a friend from church, Marlene. She'd been scrolling through her phone, showing me pictures of her new grandbaby, when she stopped mid-sentence. I saw her expression change, just a flicker, and she quickly tried to scroll past something. But I'd caught it. "Wait," I said softly. "What was that?" "Oh, nothing," she stammered. I thought that looked like." She turned the phone toward me, and my heart went cold. It was them. Denise and Martin, the two of them standing arm in arm in front of a lake house I didn't recognize. They weren't doing anything scandalous. No kisses, no embraces, just holding hands like a couple in love, smiling at the camera like they had every right to. Marlene's voice was quiet. "Someone from our community group posted it. I didn't want to say anything, Evelyn. Maybe there's an explanation." But I knew there wasn't. There was nothing to explain, because sometimes seeing is enough. That night I didn't cry. I didn't confront him. I just sat at the kitchen table, looking around at the home we'd built together, every photograph, every knick-knack, every quiet piece of a shared life that suddenly didn't belong to me anymore. He came home late, humming as he hung up his coat, smelling faintly of Denise's perfume. I could have screamed. I could have demanded answers. But what would be the point? I already knew the truth, and more than that, I knew what it meant, that the people I'd trusted most had found comfort in each other and used my trust as their cover. So I waited. The next morning, while he was at work, I packed a small suitcase, just the essentials. A few clothes, my wedding ring, my mother's old photo album. I didn't leave a note. Didn't take the car. I called a taxi and told the driver to take me anywhere with peace and quiet. I ended up in a tiny apartment across town, the kind of place with thin walls and mismatched curtains, where no one asks questions. The first night there, I sat by the window and listened to the traffic hum below, and for the first time in months the air felt honest. Everyone assumed I was heartbroken. They whispered that I'd finally lost everything. But they were wrong. I hadn't lost, I'd seen. I'd seen the way people hide their sins behind kindness. I'd seen how loyalty turns into habit, and how habit turns into blindness. And now with all that gone, I could finally see clearly. In that little apartment, I started piecing myself back together, not with rage or sorrow, but with quiet calculation. I still had friends, connections, and a mind sharper than they remembered. I'd spent my life reading people, at the library, at church, in conversation, and now I had two people to read better than ever before. Martin thought I was gone for good. Denise thought she'd won. But neither of them understood that a woman who's been silent isn't weak. She's watching. She's learning what matters, what breaks, and what can be rebuilt in her favor. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let them keep what wasn't theirs. And as I sat there one night, the city lights flickering outside my window, I realized something almost terrifying in its peace. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was patient, because sometimes revenge doesn't need noise or fire. Sometimes it only needs time. And time, I had plenty of. I leaned back in that creaky old chair, the hum of the street below, fading into a kind of rhythm. And I whispered to myself, let them think they've won. And that was the moment it all changed. The moment I stopped being the woman who lost everything, and quietly became the woman who would take it all back. When I saw that photo on Marlene's phone, it felt like time folded in on itself, like the air was too thin to breathe. Denise and Martin stood there by the water, hand in hand, smiling like two people who had never known guilt a day in their lives. The photo wasn't posed, but it wasn't accidental either. They looked comfortable, familiar, like they'd been that way for a long time. For a moment I just stared at it. My eyes tried to make sense of it. Maybe they were just helping each other? Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. But the truth wasn't need to shout. It just sits there, quiet and undeniable. That picture was the kind of truth you can't unsee. Marlene looked at me, unsure what to say. She tried to take the phone back, mumbling something about how people take pictures out of context. But it didn't matter. I wasn't angry with her. She didn't mean for me to see it. Maybe it was meant to happen that way, gentle, in daylight, surrounded by the normal sounds of the world, so it wouldn't break me completely. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't pace the floor or throw things. I didn't even ask questions. What could I ask that I didn't already know? The answers were in the silence that had been creeping into our home for months. Martin came home around 9, humming softly as he hung his coat by the door. I could smell her on him. Denise always wore that same perfume, amber and white lily. I used to think it smelled elegant. That night, it smelled like betrayal. He walked past me, kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and went upstairs. I remember sitting there at the kitchen table, the sound of the clock ticking louder with every second. It was strange. I didn't cry. My hands were steady. My heart felt heavy, yes, but calm in a way I didn't expect. Like my body already knew what my mind hadn't yet admitted, that my life with him was over. When the sun came up the next morning, I made coffee as usual. He came down, sat at the table, and read the paper. We talked about groceries, the weather, and the neighbor's new fence. Just like every other morning. But under that thin layer of routine, something had shifted. I was already gone, even though I was sitting right there. After he left for work, I packed a small suitcase. Not out of impulse, out of clarity. I folded my clothes neatly, chose the things that truly belonged to me, and left everything else behind. Jewelry he'd bought me, framed photos of the three of us, the furniture we'd picked out together. All of it stayed. Before I walked out, I stood in the doorway for a long moment. The morning light was spilling across the floor, catching on the dust I hadn't noticed before. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine. Not anymore. I didn't leave a note. I didn't want an explanation or apology. I just wanted space to breathe again. Space to think. I called a cab and told the driver to take me across town. I didn't even know where I was going until I saw the For Rent sign in a window above a little corner store. The place was small, with peeling paint and a faint smell of salt from the nearby ocean, but it was quiet. That's what I needed most. Quiet. The landlord didn't ask many questions. I signed the papers and moved in that afternoon. The only sound in the apartment was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint murmur of traffic outside. For the first time in years, I was alone, truly alone. And though it hurt, it also felt freeing. The first few nights were the hardest. I'd catch myself listening for Martin's footsteps, or Denise's cheerful knock at the door. My body was still trained to their rhythms. There were moments I'd wake up in the dark and reach for someone who wasn't there. But then I'd remember the photo, and that strange, numb peace would wash over me. Again, people found out soon enough. Small towns have long memories and short boundaries. They said I'd finally broken, that the betrayal had shattered me. I let them think that. It was easier that way. Sympathy was a good disguise. It gave me time, because I wasn't broken. I was thinking. You see, when you've lived as long as I have, you start to understand that revenge doesn't always have to be fire and fury. Sometimes it's about patience, about knowing exactly what people value most, and waiting until they've wrapped themselves in comfort before pulling the rug out from under them. And Martin and Denise? They valued appearances, reputation, security. That was their weakness. In that little apartment, I started piecing things together quietly, like a puzzle. I still had old papers, bank records, deeds, insurance documents, things most people toss aside after a while. I'd kept them all, filed away neatly over the years, because I'm the kind of woman who doesn't forget where she's come from. At night, I'd make tea, sit by the window, and go through them, line by line, transaction by transaction. I learned the patterns of our finances, what was in my name, what wasn't. I remembered who helped us when we bought the house, which lawyer handled our paperwork, which mutual friends still owed me favors. The kind of details you don't think matter until they suddenly do. I didn't call anyone for weeks. Didn't answer questions from neighbors or family. Let them think I was hiding from the pain. The truth was, I was studying it, letting it teach me. There's something about silence that sharpens you, something about heartbreak that clears away the fog of daily life. I'd spent my whole life trusting people, first George, then Martin, then Denise. But now I realized the one person I should have trusted all along was me. I started walking by the ocean in the evenings. The waves were steady, predictable. There was a rhythm to them that comforted me. Some nights I'd see couples holding hands and feel a pang, not of jealousy, but of recognition. Love, I realized, isn't destroyed by betrayal. It just changes form. Mine had turned into something quieter, colder, focused. I thought about Denise, how she used to laugh and tell me that women our age were invisible. Men look right through us, she'd say. Maybe that's why she did it, to prove she could still be seen, to feel young again. I almost pitied her for that. Almost. As the days passed, I found myself growing stronger. Not in the way people talk about moving on, but in the way a storm strengthens the ground it passes over. Every morning I woke up a little clearer, a little more certain of what I was going to do. I didn't want to hurt them. Not physically, not loudly. No, I wanted them to live in the kind of discomfort they'd given me. The quiet kind. The kind that builds and builds until it breaks you from the inside out. And so I waited. One morning, a letter arrived, forwarded from the old address. It was from the bank. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I saw a name I hadn't seen in years, the same lawyer who'd handled our estate paperwork after George died. I still remembered the firm's address. It was like the universe was drawing a line under my thoughts, telling me where to begin. I called the office, pretending it was a simple inquiry about updating a will. The woman on the phone recognized my name right away. "Oh, Mrs. Clark," she said warmly, "we still have your records in the archive. Would you like us to send them over?" I smiled to myself, though she couldn't see it. "Yes," I said softly, "I'd like that very much." That night, as I looked at the envelope sitting on my small kitchen table, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't joy or relief. It was power, quiet, deliberate, and patient. They thought I was finished. They thought they'd built a life out of my trust and walked away clean. But trust leaves traces. In paperwork, in memory, in the small details careless people never think to erase. And I still remembered everything. So I poured myself another cup of tea, stared out the window at the glowing street below, and whispered to the night, "Let's see what you've really built, Denise." That was the night the plan began. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of the calm understanding that some people only learn through loss. And I was finally ready to teach the lesson. The silence I'd once feared became my greatest ally. Because while they were busy living their new life, I was building something else entirely, a way to make sure that when the time came, they'd lose far more than they ever took from me. And when that time arrived, I'd be ready. Not shaking, not crying, just steady, like the tide. I heard it first in pieces, a passing remark at church, a whispered worry over coffee, the kind of small-town gossip that slides into your ear like a cat and then curls up. At first I told myself it wasn't my business. It felt wrong to eavesdrop on a pain that had nothing to do with me. But I'd spent enough years reading people to know the cadence of trouble when I heard it. Denise's laughter had the wrong ring those days. It was too quick, and it faded too soon. Denise's cutting back, Marlene said one morning as we shelved donated books at the library. She looked sideways like she didn't quite want to be the one delivering the news. Said she's having some issues with the mortgage. Thought you might like to know. My hand went still on the spine of a paperback. Mortgage issues. The words sat in my mouth like a foreign taste. I thought of Denise's paint choices, the crown molding she'd bragged about at the last. The trips she used to take. I thought of Martin's steady work and the ease of their new couple life, or what I'd imagined it to be. People are complicated, and money has a way of revealing the parts you'd rather keep hidden. There was more. Someone mentioned a plumber's bill that had been left unpaid. Someone else said her card had been repossessed for a day before she managed to get it back. The town was a fall from grace. I remember the way my stomach tightened, a physical hollowness I hadn't felt since the photo on Marlene's phone. It shouldn't have made me feel anything, but it did. Not joy. No, not that. Something quieter. Attention like a beam sweeping a stage, and finally noticing a person who had been lurking in the wings. I watched them from a distance for a while, like a bird that studies the wind before it takes a plunge. Denise kept up appearances for a time. She wore bright scarves and said breezy things when she saw me, making jokes about the weather, always sharp with that laugh. Martin, too, tried to make it look as though nothing had shifted. But I began to notice the small betrayals the situation inflicted on their daily life. The thermostat turned down a notch, the antiques left to gather dust, the pantry shelves not as full as they used to be. You might wonder why I didn't rush in with a righteous speech or a shaming stare. Pride, for one. Old friendships carry their own complicated gravity. We had been sisters in all the ways that mean something. We'd cut the cakes at each other's birthdays. We'd held casseroles in hospital parking lots. We'd chosen bridesmaids and dried tears. It felt unseemly to step in with a sermon. Besides, I had learned that the loud approach rarely mends what's broken. It often makes it splinter more neatly. So instead I did something else. Something quieter. When Marlene mentioned Denise's mortgage again, casually over scrambled eggs at the church basement brunch, something like an idea came to me. It was not a plan at first, only a thought that flickered and didn't go away. I started looking at my own papers with new eyes. The house I shared with Martin had been in my name. Mostly, the loan had been paid down over the years, with months of tight margins and careful saving. I had kept copies of everything in a neat manila folder, because habits from years of librarianship don't die. There were more things I'd tucked away. Insurance policies, a small stock certificate from an inheritance, a bank account with a modest cushion that would be enough to help someone get on their feet for a little while. On a gray Tuesday, I drove by Denise's house. She stood on the porch, hands folded, watching a delivery man go up the drive with a box too heavy for a woman of her size to carry easily. I saw the strain in her shoulders. I felt my breath go shallow. And then I drove home, and brewed tea and sat at my kitchen table and told myself to be sensible. Why don't you call her? Marlene suggested when we met in the garden the next day. Offer help with something small. People appreciate a hand more than a lecture. The word help floated in my head. I turned it over until the rough edges smoothed. Help can mean many things. It can also be a doorway, so I called, not with a tremor of accusation, not with a tremor of pain. I called with a voice that was steady, the voice I used to read to children on quiet afternoons, calm, measured, kind. Denise, I said when she picked up. I heard you might be having a tricky time with the house. I wanted to see if there's anything I can do. There was a pause on the other end, a small, almost imperceptible catch. Her laugh came out brittle at first, the practiced laugh people use to hide the ache of pride. Evie, you're such a gem, but I'm fine, really. Don't start fussing over me. It's no fuss, I said. I mean it. If you need someone to water the plants or pick up a grocery order, anything. I let the sentence trail like a hand held out without demanding it be taken. After a long minute, she surprised me. You know, there's a little downstairs flat, she said. It's small, rent's not much. If you knew the place until you felt ready to come back. The hesitation in her voice sounded less like concern, and more like calculation. Pride, I'd thought. That's what made people say things they would not otherwise. You're offering me a room? I asked, keeping my voice light. We have the space, she said quickly, and I could use the help around the house. I'll cover a small rent, and you'll be nearby. It'll make things easier for everyone. The polite smile in her voice told me as much as her words. She had a point to make, to prove she could be generous, to show she could host the woman she'd wronged with a magnanimity. That would ease her own conscience. She never suspected, not for 1 second, that I was seeing the opening with complete clarity. All right, I said. I'll come by and have a look." When I arrived, Denise greeted me at the door in a scarf that matched the curtains in the living room. Her energy was all charm, the practiced hostess I had known for years. She gave me a tour of the small, tidy flat downstairs, a kitchenette, a thin mattress, a window that looked out onto the back alley. It was practical and small, a place meant for convenience rather than comfort. Denise spoke about the bills she'd already prepaid for the month. She pointed out a small built-in closet and said, almost as if rehearsing, that she'd be happy to help me settle in. I said thank you and smiled, because what else does one do in such moments? She led me down the narrow stairs with the same eager confidence she'd used at parties, proud of her domain. I pretended to gape at the clever storage solutions as if delighted by each small thrift store charm she'd added. Later, after I'd signed a short agreement, nothing fancy, only the practicalities of rent and utilities, I carried a single box down to the new space. I thought about how the turn of events looked from the outside. The woman everyone assumed had been broken now moving into the house of the woman who had betrayed her. I felt the pull of irony like a sun-warmed stone. It settled into my palm, heavy and encouraging. Over the first few days I watched them through small glimpses. Denise bustling about upstairs, arranging flowers she could barely afford. Martin trying to keep the boiler running. Denise would call down occasionally, asking if I wanted tea, or commenting on some small repair. Each time she opened her mouth in that bright, performative way, I'd notice the little flinch in her face when no one applauded. Pride, as it turns out, is expensive. Living under her roof was strange and delicious in the smallest of ways. I kept my voice gentle and offered to handle little household tasks, folding towels, sweeping a stubborn patch of dust, helping with the grocery list. I cooked one night and left the pot on the stove with a note, "Dinner? Help yourself." I watched Denise's face when she came down and saw the bowl, and I felt a tiny private victory pulse inside me. Small kindnesses have a way of placing power softly, unnoticed. And I listened. I learned how bills were being paid, late notices that were explained away in half-syllables, credit card balances that had quietly crept into the red. I listened to the way Denise argued with the phone company, and the way Martin muttered to himself about work. There were cracks everywhere, in the veneer of their new life, in the seams of their grand plan. Money, as I'd once thought, is not just numbers on a page. It is the quiet language of comfort. One evening, I found Denise sitting alone at the dining table, a stack of envelopes spread before her. Her face was pinched in a way that no scarf or smile could hide. She looked up when I entered and tried to plaster on that welcoming brightness, but it fell apart halfway through. Her eyes were tired in a way I hadn't dared to see before. "Evie," she said, the charm gone for a moment, "it's harder than I thought." I slid a cup of tea across the table. "It's okay to say that," I told her softly. She exhaled, and for the first time in months she looked like herself again. Smaller, human. I thought we could have something new. I thought I deserved. She stopped, the words too clumsy for the truth. She darted a quick look at Martin, who was in the workshop pretending not to listen. "Deserved what?" I asked, because wasn't that the question at the heart of it all? Deserved what, indeed? She stared at her hands. To be seen, to feel young. They are the honest things she'd hidden under dresses and wine and visits. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you, Evie. It just happened." The confession arrived late, like someone running to catch a train already gone. I could have said a dozen things. I could have told her about the nights I lay awake listening for footsteps that wouldn't return. I could have reminded her that she'd once held me when I cried, and that trust is not an umbrella to be moved at will. But I didn't. We were older women, and the truth rarely looks like a sparky confrontation in the middle of a sentence. It softens into 1,000 small admissions that add up to the hard parts of life. Instead, I let her words sink into me, and then floated gently back up the surface with a calmness I hadn't felt in a long time. "You wanted to be seen," I said, "and you tried to find it where it wasn't yours to take." She looked at me, shame and something like regret, mingling on her face. "I'm sorry," she said finally, and it may have been the most honest apology I'd heard in years, though I knew it didn't stitch the torn places. "I know," I said simply, and left it there, because there was a plan forming in my head now, not of vindictive cruelty, but of careful, patient redress. If she wanted a chance to rebuild, she would need to do it without stealing the foundations of others. If she wanted to be young again, she'd learn that youth has a cost that can't be inflated with borrowed time and borrowed loyalty. Living downstairs, I observed, and I acted in small, deliberate ways. I returned library books she forgot. I mailed letters she was too proud to queue, and I kept a careful record of every small kindness and small failure. It felt oddly comforting to be quietly useful in the very world she had tried to claim. Power, I learned, could be low and steady, like a candle on a long night. And all the while, the house breathed around us, full of mismatched rugs and a piano that hadn't been tuned in years. I walked its rooms like someone reacquainting themselves with a memory. The trick was not to make noise. The trick was to sit in the quiet and let the evidence of their choices reveal itself. One morning, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No note, just a plain sheet with the bank's logo and a few numbers that meant, when read by someone who understood balance sheets and small-town loans, that the house was precariously close to the edge. My lips formed a small, almost indifferent smile. The plan, which had started as a flicker, now had the outline of a shape. It was not cruel. It was just the kind of slow justice that fits itself into the daily life of people who believe appearances are more important than truth. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my small table, watching the light through the curtains. Outside, the garden needed pruning again. Denise would fuss and tell me the roses needed more sun. Inside, I'd bent the habit of kindness into a steady tool, holding it like a lens. That's how it began. By offering help where help was needed, by stepping into the very home that had been meant to erase me. I moved with the patience of someone who has nothing left to prove, except that she is still whole. And as I arranged my few boxes in the small downstairs cabinet, I felt something like peace and something like resolve. Two companions that would carry me into the next part of this story, the part where quiet plans meet the world and begin their work. I used to think revenge had to be loud, dramatic, fiery, full of shouting and slammed doors. But I was wrong. Sometimes revenge sounds like silence. Through thin walls, the kind that hums between rooms when two people can't stand the sight of each other anymore. Downstairs I could hear everything. The old house carried sound like whispering witness. Late at night, the rhythm of their voices would rise and fall, hers sharp and trembling, his low and defensive. There were pauses long enough for me to picture them both staring at the floor, realizing how far from love they'd fallen. Denise's laughter had vanished months ago. It was replaced by something clipped, bitter, the tone of a woman trying too hard to hold on to what's already gone. She still wore her scarves and perfume, still greeted neighbors with that polite brightness, but I could see it in her eyes when she came down to collect the mail. Tired eyes, eyes that had started to understand loss, though she'd never say it aloud. Martin avoided me. He didn't have the courage for confrontation. Some nights I'd hear him leaving quietly through the back door, the screen creaking behind him. I never asked where he went, but I didn't have to. When he came back, his steps were slower, heavier. The man who once hummed himself while cooking now ate in silence, staring into his plate like it had betrayed him too. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Their life was unraveling without my help. I just watched, calmly, methodically, like someone tending a long, slow fire. From my little apartment downstairs, I began keeping notes, not maliciously, simply carefully. Receipts left on the counter, bills she forgot to hide, envelopes with his name and hers in mismatched handwriting. I had learned that people in trouble become careless. Denise would leave documents on the kitchen table, half open, as if the truth could stay folded forever. Sometimes she'd call me up to help with something, to fix a curtain rod, to look at an old statement, to check the mail while she was out, and every time I'd smile, help her, and quietly observe. The house I once built, the house that used to be mine, was now a map of someone else's lies, and I knew where every corner turned. Money had always been Denise's weakness. She liked the feel of comfort but never understood the cost of it. She'd make small talk about tight times or unexpected repairs, pretending it was temporary. But the cracks were everywhere. The unopened bills, the credit collectors calling more often, the thin envelopes she'd hide under a stack of magazines. One afternoon I heard her arguing with Martin through the vent above my kitchen. The words came muffled but sharp. "You said you'd cover it," she hissed. "I did," he shot back. Voice low but trembling. "But the cards maxed, Denise. You knew that." Silence, then the sound of something. Maybe a glass hitting the floor. "You promised me," she said finally, her voice breaking just slightly. "Promises. They're easy to make when love is new and cheap. Harder to keep when life asks for payment." After that fight, things changed. Martin stopped sleeping in their bedroom. I hear the soft creak of the desk bed late at night. Denise started drinking tea instead of wine, probably to look like she still had control. Her face grew paler, thinner, like the color was draining out of her, along with her pride. But she still held on to her arrogance. She'd knock on my door now and then, still playing the part of landlady, pretending she wasn't the one losing grip. "Everything all right down here, Evie?" she'd ask, her smile just a little too forced. "Everything's fine," I'd reply softly. "You doing okay upstairs?" Her eyes would flicker, just for a second. "Of course," she'd say, quick and brittle. "We're just adjusting. That's what people call it when their world starts collapsing, and they don't want anyone to notice the dust." I kept my kindness steady. Like a soft metronome, I'd bring her tea, offer to help with errands, even slip a 20 into the grocery envelope she kept by the fridge. She never refused. She'd thank me with a tired smile as if taking help didn't sting her anymore. But it did. Pride doesn't die easily. It just quiets down when the bills pile up. Every night after I tidied my small space, I'd open my drawer, the one with my quiet collection, bank receipts, utility statements, property records I'd pulled from the courthouse website, proof piece by piece that the house she'd stolen wasn't legally hers at all. Her name was on nothing permanent. The loan, the deed, the taxes, all still trailed back to me, to my signature, my records, my years of paying for every brick and board. And then one evening, as I sorted through another stack of unpaid mail she'd asked me to file, I found something that nearly made me laugh. A foreclosure notice. Dated weeks ago. She'd hidden it under a pile of old magazines, but the red stamp on the envelope still bled through faintly. Final warning. For a moment I just sat there, staring at it. Not with joy, but with strange, peaceful sadness. The kind you feel when the last piece of a puzzle clicks into place and you realize you've been looking at the full picture all along. I slipped it back exactly where I'd found it. No need to rush. The universe had its own rhythm, and I'd learned to move with it. In the mornings I'd hear her pacing upstairs, quick, nervous steps that stopped whenever Martin spoke. He was tired of pretending, too. His voice grew distant, dull. Some nights I'd hear the front door slam, and he wouldn't come back till dawn. Other nights there was just silence, the thick, heavy kind that fills a house when two people are trapped inside the same mistake. Still, I stayed kind, always kind. "Do you want me to look over those bills for you?" I'd ask casually over coffee. "Sometimes I'm good with numbers." "Oh, Evie, that's sweet," she'd reply, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But I've got it handled," and she'd smile, that tired, shrinking smile of a woman who knows she doesn't have anything handled at all. When I walked past the garden, I could see the decay creeping in. The flowers were withering. The paint near the porch had started to peel. The home she'd fought so hard to claim was crumbling around her, not from neglect, but from emptiness. You can't fill a house with stolen love and expect it to stand. I wasn't cruel. I never raised my voice, never gloated. I just existed, quietly, steadily, reminding her in every small way that I was still here, that she hadn't erased me, that the house she walked through every day still carried my breath in its walls, and maybe that's what broke her more than anything. The day it happened was ordinary, too ordinary to feel like a turning point. The mail slipped through the front slot, landing softly on the hallway rug. I waited until I heard her shuffle past upstairs, then climbed the steps to fetch my own envelope from the pile. It was there, the letter I'd been expecting. Crisp, official, marked by a law firm I knew well. I held it for a long moment before sliding it under her door. No note, no words, just the envelope, resting like a whisper at her feet. I went back downstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and sat by the small window. Outside, the morning light was soft and gray, stretching across the yard like a new beginning. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of her footsteps, slow, hesitant. Then the faint tear of paper. Silence followed. I could almost feel it, that moment of realization, when her eyes traced the words and the blood drained from her face. When she saw the names, the dates, the documents that confirmed what she had probably always feared deep down, that this house, this life, this illusion she'd built, wasn't really hers at all. Upstairs, a chair scraped. Something fell, and then nothing. Just quiet. I took a sip of tea, the steam rising gently against the window pane, and let the stillness settle. The house had gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't because of shame or secrets. It was the sound of the truth finally landing, heavy and undeniable. I didn't need to go up. I didn't need to see her face. I already knew what it would look like, because I'd worn that same expression once. Years ago, when I realized someone I loved had stolen everything I'd built. Only now the circle was complete. And the funny thing about justice is, it doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it shows up quietly, folded neatly in an envelope, slipped under a door, carried by a woman who learned that silence can be the loudest sound of all. When I heard the faint thud of the letter hitting the floor above me, I didn't look up right away. I just kept stirring the sugar into my tea, slow and even. The sound that followed, the creak of footsteps, the whisper of paper tearing open, drifted through the ceiling like an old song I'd known by heart. Then silence. Long silence. It's funny how quiet can hold so many emotions at once. Confusion, anger, guilt, even grief. I sat there listening to it move through the house like a slow wind, touching every corner that had once been mine. I could almost picture Denise standing there, eyes wide, her fingers trembling as she read each word. I knew exactly what she was seeing: the official notice from the firm, the terms of the joint mortgage, the unpaid transfer fees, the clause that had never been closed. It all spelled out what I'd known for months now, that legally the house still belonged to me. Not her, not them, me. It wasn't a trick or a loophole, it was the truth, one she'd chosen to ignore, the same way she'd ignored the fine print, the friendship, the consequences. I heard movement upstairs, hurried, panicked, the quick shuffle of footsteps, a door slamming, then Martin's voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "What's this about?" he demanded, his tone sharp. Her answer came low and strained. It's Evelyn. She's saying the house isn't ours, that the bank—" "It's not possible," he interrupted, but his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I let the moment sit. I didn't go up. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. They spent the next few hours trying to make sense of it. Phones ringing, drawers opening, the rustle of paperwork. I could hear Denise's voice breaking, softer now, the defiance slipping away. There's something sobering about realizing the ground beneath you never truly belonged to you. As the day turned to dusk, the sound slowed. The arguing stopped. The house fell still again. A few hours later there was a knock at my door. It wasn't firm or angry, just hesitant, unsure. I opened it to find Denise standing there, barefoot, her eyes red but dry. She held the letter in her hand, like it might burn her if she squeezed it too tight. "Evie," she started, her voice hoarse. What is this?" I looked at her, calm and steady. "It's the truth," I said simply. "The house was never fully transferred. The mortgage was still open under my name. Legally it's still mine." She blinked, swallowing hard. "You knew this?" "For a while," I admitted. "I wanted to see what you'd do with it. I suppose now I know." Her mouth trembled as if she wanted to argue, but she couldn't find the words. Behind her, I could see Martin lingering near the stairs, his expression blank. Not angry, just hollow, like a man watching his own reflection fade from a mirror. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "I believe you," I said. And I did. Because people like Denise rarely mean for things to go that far. They just keep taking steps in the wrong direction until there's no path left. They could have let the silence stretch longer, but I didn't want cruelty. That wasn't what this was about. "I'll give you a few days to move out," I said gently. "There's no rush. Take what you need. I won't stand in your way." Her face broke, not into tears, not into anger, but into something smaller. Acceptance, maybe, or the beginning of it. She nodded slowly, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say," I told her softly. "Time already said it for us." And with that, I closed the door. For the first time in years, the house felt light again, like it exhaled. That night, I lay awake, listening to the familiar creaks of the walls. I remembered how I'd once painted this place with Bill, my first husband, before the years rolled, and lives changed. I remembered laughter in the kitchen, music on Sunday mornings, the warmth that used to live in these walls before Betrayal made it cold. And now, somehow it felt like it was returning. The next few days passed quietly. Boxes appeared by the door upstairs, the sound of tape pulling, of drawers closing one last time. No shouting, no blame, just the slow sound of people leaving a space they'd already lost long ago. When they finally left, I watched from the window. Denise didn't look back. Martin did for just a second, his eyes catching mine through the glass. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just nodded once, like a man who finally understood something too late. Then the car pulled away. The house was silent again. But it wasn't the suffocating kind of silence anymore. It was clean, open, free. That evening I made myself a cup of tea. The same cup I used to drink from when Denise and I would talk about everything. Our hopes, our heartbreaks, our husbands. I sat on the same sofa, in the same living room, and let the late afternoon sunlight pour in through the curtains. It was warm, almost golden. And for the first time I noticed how the dust in the air looked beautiful, not sad, every little speck catching the light like a tiny reminder that even what's been forgotten can still shine. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt right, like the world had found its balance again. People talk about revenge like it's a fire. Bright, dangerous, thrilling. But I've learned it's not fire that lasts. It's water, it moves quietly, it wears things down slowly until what's weak gives way on its own. I didn't take anything from Denise that wasn't already mine. I didn't raise my voice or seek to humiliate her. I simply stood still and let time and truth do what they were meant to do. And maybe that's the greatest revenge of all, to reclaim what's yours without letting it change who you are. I spent that night opening the windows and airing the house out. The smell of dust and old perfume drifted away, replaced by the scent of salt from the sea and the faint sweetness of the jasmine bush outside the porch. The house breathed again. As I walked through the rooms, I found the old photographs still hanging in the hallway. Denise had never taken them down. There we were, younger, laughing, holding cups of coffee, arms around each other's shoulders. I didn't take them down either. They were part of the story, not something to erase, but something to remember. Because I realized something, sitting there with my tea as the light faded, revenge wasn't really the ending. It was just the bridge that led me back home. I leaned back into the sofa, let the quiet fill the room, and spoke softly, maybe to the air, maybe to myself. Some things don't need revenge, I said. They just need time and truth to do the work for you. The clock ticked gently. Outside, the sky turned a shade of orange and lavender that only comes once the sun decides it's done fighting the day. I took another sip of tea, smiled faintly, and let the warmth settle deep into me. Because sometimes peace doesn't arrive with fanfare or applause. Sometimes it just slips in quietly, sits beside you, and stays. That's how the story ends for me. Not with bitterness, but with grace. The kind of grace that lets you look at what was, what's been lost, and still find gratitude in what remains. So to whoever's listening, if you've been wronged, if you've been pushed aside, if someone tried to take what you built, don't fuss to fight. Don't let anger write your ending. Just wait, let truth catch up. It always does. And when it does, you'll find yourself right where you belong again, at peace, holding your tea, watching the sunlight fill the room that was always yours. If you felt this story in your heart, if you've ever known the kind of hurt that time had to heal, don't forget to like, share, or subscribe for more stories like this one. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths.